There we go. Okay. Hi, McLaughlin Middle School. Hi. Did you enjoy your 4-day weekend? Yes. So obviously I was supposed to be here on Friday, but we had snow, so that happened. But I'm actually glad it happened because I was like really sick. I had like a horrible cold, so I would have came in here sounding like a man. So I'm glad that I don't sound like a man anymore. So yeah, she is right. My name is Reka Robinson, and yes, I do the morning show on Power 99.1. Does anybody listen to the station? Yay! So I gotta tell you, that is not the only thing that I do here in the city. I actually have a lot of history in this city. And I would like to share that history with you before I start talking about the wonderful man, the great man that was Martin Luther King Jr. Can I share some history? Is that cool? All right, perfect. So up on the screen is me, that's little me, with my buck teeth before I had braces, with my mom and dad, and my older brother, Jemiah. So my dad is from here, actually. He was raised here in Pasco. He went to Pasco High, that's where he graduated from in 1970, so he's a lot older than you, a lot older than me. So he later met and married my mom, who was actually from Seattle, but we lived here until I was 3. In 1986, they actually packed up and moved myself and my older brother here to Seattle. Like I said, I was 3 years old, but I was born at Catholic, so I was born here, maybe just like you, okay? Now, I do have to go ahead and, my little brother, if he saw this speech and he didn't hear me speak about him, he'd be upset. So that's my little brother. He wasn't born here. He was born in Seattle. That's me when I was 7. Oh, look at me, I'm so cute. All right, now, even though I lived in Seattle, I grew up there, I came back often because my grandparents were from Pasco. They lived here. And every summer, every 3 months, every 6 months, my dad would be like, get in the car, we going to Pasco, we gotta visit your grandparents. Seriously, until I was in high school, I thought it was called Pasco. I didn't know it was the Tri-Cities. Only knew about Pasco, okay? So my grandparents, right here, Virgie and Richard Robinson. It's a very young picture of them. So pretty, aren't they? Yeah, so I would come and visit them, okay? Now, they lived in Pasco on the corner of like 18th and Margaret Street, right across from the Pasco Boys and Girls Club. But back then, when I visited, it was actually an elementary school, and I would go play on that playground. Does that name Virgie sound familiar to anybody? There you go. Virgie Robinson Elementary School is named after my grandmother, my dad's mom. And don't be alarmed, that is me. That's when I used to straighten my hair. This is my natural curls, got my natural hair back, it's real. But yeah, so Virgie Robinson Elementary School was named after my grandmother. Isn't that cool? Like, who gets a school named after their relative? And if it wasn't for Martin Luther King Jr., and the civil rights movement, that probably would have never happened. A school named after a black woman, excuse me. But because of Martin Luther King Jr., it happened. Now, I know we're gonna talk about Martin Luther King Jr. today, the great man that he was, but I would be remiss if I did not speak on other people that were a part of what we call the civil rights movement, okay? Yes, Martin Luther King Jr. was the face, but he could not have done it alone. Nobody does. Nobody does it alone. So let's talk about his wife, Coretta Scott King. It's actually because of us that we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. every third Monday of January. She fought for that. That wasn't something that happened. When Martin Luther King Jr. was alive, people didn't like him. He was radical to them. He was doing things that they didn't want him to do. But after he died, Coretta Scott King, she fought for that. And now we celebrate, of course, Martin Luther King Jr. as we did yesterday. Rosa Parks. They actually say that she is the mother of the civil rights movement because the movement started after she was sitting on a bus and they asked her to move because the bus was full and a white man needed to sit down. She refused, she was thrown in jail. The civil rights movement began that day. They boycotted, and now we can all sit on the bus when we want to, where we want to, what seat we want to. I don't have to move for anybody. So that's Rosa Parks. John Lewis, alive today. You may have seen him on TV. Now listen, so I practiced this speech in front of like my friend and her kids. Her kids are in elementary school, but that little Abby, 11 years old, when I told her John Lewis was still alive, she was like, oh my God, how is he still alive? And I said, oh, because baby, this wasn't that long ago. 79 years old. We do need to pray for him though. He was diagnosed, unfortunately, with cancer. So we got to pray for him, okay? Because we don't want him to die for that. I mean, come on, he didn't die in the civil rights movement. He was thrown in jail many times. That's from his Facebook page, by the way. He marched with Martin Luther King Jr. So like I said, Martin Luther King Jr. did not do it alone, and I won't be able to name everybody that was a part of the civil rights movement. Do you know how many people that is? It's thousands and thousands of people. But I just wanted you to see a few of the faces. So today, this Martin Luther King Jr. presentation is dedicated to him and my ancestors, the ones whose names I don't know and the ones whose names I do know. After all, my sweater says, I am my ancestors' wildest dream. This is what they wanted. I'm a black woman standing in front of you talking. In the 50s, probably would not have been allowed. It'd be illegal because of segregation. So I do want you to remember that this is just this flash bulb. You know, I only got like 20 minutes to tell you about Martin Luther King Jr., so I can't tell you everything. But are you ready to take the journey with me? Do you want to learn some stuff? You ready? All right. So right now what's playing on the slide is what we call a Negro spiritual. And it's called We Shall Overcome, and it went a little bit like this, and I'm not a singer, so sorry. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. And that was a song that they sang every time that they marched. And overcome they did. And again, that is what we call a Negro spiritual and the anthem of the civil rights movement. That was the era in the midst of the Jim Crow laws. That era birthed Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream. Let's see if this will play for you. I wish you could hear it, because this is Martin Luther King Jr. in Washington, D.C. in 1963, where he said, now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial injustice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. Now, the quicksands of racial injustice were many things, but he was specifically speaking on the Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws were state and local laws that enforced racial segregation. Now, the laws were enforced until about 1965, and mostly they were in our southern states. However, sometime around up into the 1960s, there was a sign on the Kennewick side of what was called the Green Bridge back then. And there was a sign that warned all colored people to be out of Kennewick by sundown, which means when my dad was living here, he was not allowed to be in Kennewick when the sun was going down. You see, Martin Luther King Jr., he wanted no parts of segregation, and he knew it was wrong to treat someone differently because of the color of their skin. He not only knew that, but he wanted to change that, especially for people of color like me, especially for poor people. And he didn't just say it, he actually put action behind those words. Those same words that he spoke in 1963, he put action behind it. So I ask you today, McLaughlin Middle School, what is your dream? Will you fight for it? Will it be positive? Will it leave a mark on at least one person's life or no? The mark that King's life left is a miracle for us. His words as well as his actions allow me actually to be friends with these women. I have friends who are white, mixed, Asian, Indian, black. I want you to look around and imagine if you could not be friends with the people you're sitting next to because of the color of their skin. What is that? Right? Exactly, it's funny. Like, what are we talking about? So we may have cultural differences, Mexican, black, Indian, white, And that's amazing. And cultures should be respected and celebrated. See me as a black woman, but just don't treat me differently because I am black. Because at the end of the day, we're all human, and there is simply no reason to be treated differently because of the color of your skin. Oh my God, it's me. Big forehead out and everything. I think I was like 7, maybe? 6? Thank you. So I grew up to be me, right? This little girl, me. But before I was 36, I was in middle school just like you. We call it junior high. I went to Meridian Junior High in Kent, Washington. And when I got to middle school, it was 7th grade then, and I tried out for the cheer squad, and I made it, okay? I made it. And I was such a cheerleader. I became a leader in the cheer squad. I knew all the cheers. I was great, all right? And that's when I decided for the rest of my life, I'm gonna be a cheerleader, at least until I got to high school and graduated, okay? Except for the coach that I had in 7th grade, she retired. And the lady that took over, well, she held tryouts at the beginning of our 8th grade year. And tryouts, they were very serious, especially back then. We had to try out in front of whatever the panel of judges was, and of course your coach. You tried out, and I just knew, I made it. It's fine, I made it. I'm gonna be a cheerleader the rest of my life. So you go home and you wait to get a call. And everybody who was on the team before and the new people who tried out, everybody got a call. And I just knew that I would hear, Reka, you made the squad again, okay. Except for I didn't hear that. My new coach told me I did not make the squad. Yeah, I was devastated. What? Me? What am I gonna do now? I thought I was gonna be a cheerleader for the rest of my life. But that didn't matter to the new coach. You see, back then in Kent, I grew up in what is called suburban America, and I was like one of only few blacks. And for some people, that made them very uncomfortable. So when she told me I had to make the squad, my parents, they didn't accept that. So they went up to the school, had a meeting with the principal, and in a couple of days, I was back on the squad. Because that coach at that time, she couldn't come up with a reason why I didn't make the squad. So it went unsaid that she did not want me on the squad because I was a black girl. Who does that? Come on. So, I wonder where that coach is today. I wonder where she is. Anyway, so I was a cheerleader until I graduated from high school. So, yay, I actually still have that uniform as well. So I would ask her and anyone like her, what is so wrong with being black? It's just melanin. What is so wrong with being Mexican? Shout out to Fabian, he used to be my co-host on the morning show, and he's Mexican, so is Selena Gomez. You guys know who Selena Gomez is? Yeah. So my co-host Anthony, he's white as well, and you know what? Back in the day, in the 50s, we probably would not have been able to be co-hosts together, or if we were, I'd have to go through the back door, not use the same water fountain as him. What's wrong with being Spider-Man and being white and from a different country? What's wrong with being mixed? Shout out to Zendaya, and apparently they're dating, I don't know. What's wrong with being Asian American? You guys know who Awkwafina is? She's the first Asian American to win a Golden Globe, so shout out to her. What's wrong with being Indian and marrying a white guy named Joe Jonas? Yay. So this is exactly what Martin Luther King Jr. wanted. I have a dream that one day little black boys and girls will be holding hands with little white boys and girls. And we can add Mexican in there and Indian and Asian and whatever race you are, all the mixes and all of that. And so I do have another speech from Martin Luther King Jr. that you're not going to be able to hear, but this is what he said in this speech, because this is exactly what he wanted. He wanted this assembly. He wanted all the races to be able to be in the same room legally at the same time. He was embarrassed by segregation. He hated segregation. He despised segregation. And he hated being treated differently because he was black. So this is in Watts, California, and he went down, and one of the phrases that he says at the end is very powerful. The mind is the standard of a man, not his or her skin color. Black and white together, we shall overcome. Remember the song? We shall overcome. We shall overcome. So McLaughlin Middle School, I ask you again, what will be your dream? Will you fight for it? Will it be positive? Will it leave a mark on at least one person's life or no? Martin Luther King's dream was also to get his point across nonviolently. What he said and what he did matched. Again, his words matched his actions. And down in the South, around 1965, by the way, that's Russell Wilson, go Hawks. Down in the, exactly, I know, go Hawks. Down in the South, there was an energy happening. An energy called the Civil Rights Movement. Remember, I told you, Martin Luther King Jr. did not do this alone. Civil Rights Movement, the energy was happening, and their goal was to march from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery, Alabama. Now that's about 50 miles. Can you imagine walking 50 miles? 50 miles. So that's what they wanted to do, right? And they were going to do it nonviolently, and their goal was to display their desire for black people, people who look like me, to be able to vote without discrimination. But on March 7th, 1965, when the marchers, about 600 of them, got to the bottom of the Pettus Bridge, they were attacked. Billy clubs, dogs, water hoses, tear gas. So unfortunately, the marchers had no choice but to run back to Selma. 17 people, including John Lewis. Remember we talked about John Lewis, who's still alive today? He was hurt badly. So that day in history, in the history books, we call it Bloody Sunday. And because of that day, demonstrations were held in cities across the United States, even here in Washington State, to show solidarity with the Selma marchers. So then they dusted themselves off, got back up, and marched again. And on March 9th, 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. led another march back to the bottom of the Pettus Bridge, but then they decided to turn around. And it was very symbolic. So why did they march again? Well, Martin Luther King Jr. and the Civil Rights Movement, amongst other things, again, remember, they just wanted to vote without discrimination. And they got attacked for it. Because of that desire, they got attacked for it because of racism. And this is another speech from Martin Luther King Jr., and it's called The Other America. And unfortunately, I can't play it for you, but he describes racism as this. Racism, they want us to not exist. So the seed of racism is, I do not deserve to exist. That is the thought and seed. Now, down in the South, I will say this. Uh-oh, it closed on me. Okay, that's okay. We'll do it without it, it's fine. Okay, so down in the South, they did technically have the right to vote, but did they? Black people would try to register and vote, like literally they would walk into the courthouse or wherever and say, hey, I'm here to register to vote. But then they would get what we call literary test and oral test. And they had to answer questions that were trick questions. And no matter how they answered them, they would get it wrong. Didn't matter how much they studied, what they did, what they said, it was always a trick question. Or worse, they were threatened and scared into never trying again. And our white brothers and sisters did not have these same issues. So now, remember Martin Luther King Jr. believed in nonviolent marches, right? So the people of the Civil Rights Movement marched on what we now call Bloody Sunday. We just talked about that. And they were being hit without fighting back. Imagine someone hitting you, spitting on you, dogs, billy clubs, and you do not fight back. So finally, the marchers did reach the state capitol in Montgomery. They got their 50 miles in. And the number of marches grew to 25,000, and Martin Luther King Jr. did make his speech as planned. on that day. And it's solidified in the history books as being the moment that made President Johnson sign the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And that happened on August 6, 1965. So now you are not allowed to be discriminated against when you are trying to register to vote. So when I turned 18, my dad took me to the DMV, I registered to vote, I had no questions, took an eye test, all that, whatever, got my license, and was registered to vote without discrimination. So what is your dream? Will you fight for it? Will it be positive? Will it leave a mark on at least one person's life or no? You see, Martin Luther King Jr., he was playing chess, not checkers, baby. He knew what he was doing and why. He knew the images that came out of the South, like Bloody Sunday and all of that. He knew those images would change America. At least he hoped it would. And even though we still have work to do, it worked. You see, all of those images were all over the news, all over the newspaper. And back then, that was like posting stuff on Instagram. Everybody saw it, the whole country. The laws worked. Martin Luther King Jr. knew that if you could change the law, you could change the heart, the habits of a man, and then you can change the heart of a man. And so that's what he wanted. He wanted laws to stop people from lynching people, to stop people from being segregated. He wanted us to be able, again, to be in this same room together, and it would be legal. So it changed the face of America, even here in our own backyard. So many Tri-Cityans, they don't realize that our region was once considered by many to be one of the most segregated areas in Washington state. By 1950, approximately 1,000 black people lived here in Pasco. But Kennewick kept black residents out through racially restrictive housing covenants, while Richland remained all white by providing housing only for the scientists and professional staff of Hanford. But over time, especially because of the images that came out of Bloody Sunday and the civil rights movement, that's changed. So now I own a house in Kennewick and nobody can stop me. But back in the 50s, that would not have been allowed. That's crazy, right? And there are even black people living in Richland. Isn't that cool? So the civil rights movement exposed what was happening between the races here in America. Us Northerners got to see what was really happening down South. It changed the laws, which changed the habits, which changed the hearts of men. Because then we had to deal with each other when segregation was over. So the races in America, it changed their hearts, and it caused everybody in the nation to take a look in the mirror. And that included right here in the Tri-Cities, and my dad told me that. So my dad was really young when Martin Luther King Jr. was alive, and all of that was happening. But he did live here when that sign was on the Green Bridge that said he was not allowed to be in Kennewick after dark. Now, by the way, little fun fact, the Green Bridge was here. Then they decided to build a new bridge, that's what we call the Cable Bridge. So then they tore down the Green Bridge, and that sign went with it. So again, I ask you, McLaughlin, what is your dream? Will you fight for it? Will it be positive? Will it leave a mark on at least one person's life or no? Will you stand up for what is right, even when you have people telling you it's not? That's what Martin Luther King Jr. did, because again, when he was alive, nobody liked him. They did not like what he was doing. I want you to remember that. It wasn't like everybody was like, yeah, this is all fine, it's great, let's all be together. They fought him, they scared him. They did not like him. So will you stand up for what is right, even though people tell you it's not? I stand before you today, McLaughlin, to tell you that I believe in you. And if you believe in yourself, you can do anything you put your mind to. And I know it's cliche, but it's so true. A cliche are just sayings that are true. It's true. Unfortunately, on March 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot and killed at just 39 years young, leaving a legacy behind him that we should all aspire. So I'm 3 years away from 39 years old, and I could not imagine being shot and killed for what I stood for. 39 years old. Now, and although I may not be famous as he is, that's okay. He would be proud of me for what I do in this community. So I will say this, most of us won't be as famous as Martin Luther King Jr. was, and that's okay. That shouldn't hinder you from making a difference. So what can you do in your community that matters? What can you do in this school that matters? What can you do to help at least one person that matters? It's a trickle-down effect. You focus on one, then maybe you'll help two, then maybe you'll help three, then maybe you'll help four. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. I see you grooving over there. You know I can't sing. Stop. And overcome they did. So if you're going through a struggle, I just gave you a song to sing to yourself. And I'm going to leave you with the words of the great Martin Luther King Jr. Again, if it was not for him, I would not be standing in front of you. I would not be on the radio. I couldn't live in Kennewick. In his own words, if you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, you crawl. I hear you. I hear you. Y'all have heard that before. So whatever you do, you just keep moving. Thank you.